Okay, we're just going to spend 1 minute switching over, and then we're going to get stuck into the NDIS tips and tricks. A couple of things I want to point out before we get started. The focus of today's discussion is going to be sharing great ideas with each other. I'll just give everyone a chance to come in. Have we got everyone who are going to get started? Oh, yeah, we might. Okay, yeah, right. Do you want me to stand in the middle, I suppose? All right, fair enough. All right, cool. All right. Well, I'll hand this over then. I feel like Tony Jones. Not as good looking, though, as Tony Jones. Well, he's not as good looking as me. All right. So we might get started. So if we can ask our panellists to sit down, I'll introduce them. Look, the NDIS is big. It's massive. It's a massive change for our community. I think it's a good idea. You know what? I feel really weird standing up. If it's okay, I might sit down as well. I feel. Thank you. I feel a bit better now. Excellent. All right. Cool. So the NDIS is massive. We've got 7,000 providers nationally. In New South Wales alone, delivering 24,000 services. It is a massive program of unprecedented scale. It has probably the most confusing name. It's not an insurance scheme. Well, it might be, but it's different to many other insurance schemes. But today we did invite someone from the NDIS, and we weren't able to get them. But having said that, I think we've done one better. What we've got three people who are experts in working with the practicalities of the NDIS. So you could have someone come from the NDIS and tell you about the basic theories, but we want to get stuck into the tips and tricks. We want to hear from real-world practitioners that have real-world and lived experience in delivering services to children and families, and you could draw upon their experience hopefully today. So I just want to introduce a panel. I'm going to do right now. I've got Harzita, Hashim, I'm almost sorry about that. I'm sorry. And you're from RIDBC, Rebecca Kent from Vision Australia, and Kelly Prentice from Guide Dogs. We've got Kelly Prentice. Tell me about yourself.
I'm an orientation and mobility specialist, but I also manage the Kensington team, which has got more than O&Ms in it, and I'll happily talk about that later. I have been with Guide Dogs for over 12 years, and I love technology.
Cool. We might pass over to Rebecca to introduce herself.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, Rebecca Kent. I'm a psychologist. I've worked as a child and family counsellor with Vision Australia for the last 10 years or so. And I've also, during that time, I had a role for a couple of years helping with the early rollout of the NDIS in the Blue Mountains, so helping families to understand the system, which at that point was more than new. It was a bit of a shock, I think, for some families. And so it's kind of been good, though, to follow through that process to now. And as much as things change a lot, also to start to see things develop and processes develop and families get a better handle on what it's all about.
Hi, I'm Harzita Hashim, and I'm from RIDBC, Royal Institute for Deaf and Blind Children. I have a background in occupational therapy. I've been at the organisation at RIDBC for 28 years this year, and so have worked initially as an OT in the early intervention across both vision and hearing impairment and children with additional disabilities. And then I moved into the early intervention for Just Vision, coordinating the early intervention vision service, and more recently, over the last 5 years, have been managing vision services for children 0 to 18, which includes the early intervention school support service for students enrolled in independent schools, the alternative format production team that do large print, braille and e-text, and also the orthoptists and access technology consultants. I was involved, RIDBC were ECEI, early childhood, early intervention partners, prior to this year, so I have been heavily involved in the planning processes that we provide to NDIA, and they make the plans, implement the plans. Yeah.
Are we able to get more microphones? Do we have more microphones we could grab from someone? Doesn't matter. Thank you, Alex. All right, cool. So what we might do is jump into probably the question we want to know, just to cover off the basics. Let's put our hands up. Is everyone on an NDIS plan at the moment? Yep. All right. Probably about a third, I guess. And is there people that intend to join and haven't onboarded yet? Is there in the process of onboarding? Fantastic. All right. Excellent. So we're going to probably take as assumed knowledge some of the basics of the plan, and then we might. Thank you. It's not working.
I don't know if it's working.
Okay. There you go. Hello. Beautiful. Right. There you go. All right. So let's start with Kelly, and we can go that way. What examples do you know of something that's surprising that you've seen in a plan that you could pass on as a tip to other families?
Well, nothing should be a surprise if it's reasonable and necessary for equal participation. So it's all about the justification of the item. And so I have seen things like a security doorbell included because that was reasonable and necessary for that person in particular.
Security doorbell, could you elaborate on that?
It was a security doorbell that they could see the person outside their door from somewhere else in their house.
Okay, cool. What about yourself, Rebecca?
I might agree that I think when I looked at this question, I thought I'd hate to give an example that then wouldn't be appropriate to your family. So I think what I would really like to say is that what's covered for one person might not be the same as what would be approved for you. So it really is about working on being able to explain to the person you're sitting with what's the vision, the impact of your vision on a particular task, and then being able to talk about what support is reasonable and necessary to help you to bridge that gap. So, something that's a mainstream device, we would often say iPads are very rarely covered, but I do occasionally see them go through. So it's really working on the explanation that you can give the local area coordinator about why it's reasonable and necessary for you.
And what about yourself, Harzita?
And the other thing, to just add to that as well, I would totally agree with what's been said. When you're providing the justification, they're always going to go back to what the NDIS goals are. So, how's it going to assist you to achieve the NDIS goals that you have initially put down in your plan? So remembering that anything you request, whether it's therapy or equipment, it needs to be able to relate back to one of your goals on the plan. Just as an example of what wasn't approved, JAWS, screen reader software, wasn't approved on one occasion.
That's surprising to me.
Yes.
Can I tell you the justification for JAWS? Mainstream technology is what they told me, even though nobody who is not blind uses JAWS to my knowledge, even as they define it as mainstream technology.
Okay, well, let's twist this around then. So there's going to be occasions where there's going to be misunderstandings. Can you give families tips on how to resolve issues like that?
I'm going to say don't be scared to appeal a decision. Oh, it's not working? Is that better? Oh, look. Can everybody hear me if I just talk louder? Okay. Don't be afraid to appeal a decision you don't agree with. And if you can get professionals who are willing to back you up and give you more documentation, do it. What I would say about the appeals process is don't expect you'll be talking to somebody person to person, so make sure your documentation is great. Make sure it shows how it's reasonable and necessary and how it relates to the functional impact of your vision loss. If you can do those things, appeal.
Definitely agree.
And I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are some advocacy agencies that can help support you with that appeal process. Yeah, so you could just Google them, I'm sure, and they'd come up. Yeah.
And bring your goals always back to playing the long game. So what you're building your child's capacity to be. So while in the short term you might get some things met by, for example, using a support worker, I would bring it back to you want that child to be able to do it for themselves in the long term. So you're looking for opportunities within their daily routine to make sure their capacity is built.
Okay, so let's go on to the reasonable and necessary. So let's go for some goals. So I think one of the issues you see with parents is when they're starting out this journey, some of them, I think we need help with identifying what are things we can actually do. And I think that, I was just in a parent session and it was amazing to hear some of the ideas that we swapped to help expand the lifestyles and the opportunities for our children. So are you able to give us some ideas and some interesting goals that you might, want to put forward for other parents to consider? So I can give you, just to kick it off, because I appreciate that one wasn't on a prep sheet. So, so for example, let's say I read about a situation where there's a fellow who was interested, a young person interested in studying Mandarin, and so he had a goal of studying Mandarin, and so there was supports put in place, and then there was funding for tuition to help reach that goal, which is something you wouldn't have thought of off the top.
I guess it goes back to something that Renee, that spoke earlier, was talking about. I'd really encourage you to think outside the box. Think about what your family's interests are, not just your child's interests, what you want to be able to do as a family. We had an example, a family, I was involved in the pre-planning process with a family, and they said that, they love to go bike riding. And their son was blind and they wanted him to be able to experience that with him too. And so that was one of their goals, to be able to go off bike riding as a family. And so NDIS ended up funding how much it cost to modify the bike so that, their son could sit on the back. So just thinking about your family's interests, what you want to be able to do as a family on weekends, or, if there are siblings, what the siblings, being able to play together, interact together. Socialisation is a big one. And I think that's the thing that NDIS has really allowed, is that the opportunity to be more inclusive in the community, socialisation and recreational activities.
Rebecca?
I don't know that I have a lot more to add to that. Definitely thinking outside the box is a great idea. Also, a way that we've been working with families for a long time, I know we all have, is that we do have a developmental approach to building skills now for the future. So if we can break down, if you're looking in the future for your child to be employable, have their own family, live out of home, do all of those different things, we can be looking at now what are the skills we need now to build that experience, to build those skills for the long term. Don't forget those things in your plan too, that we want to be building capacity. I know we've all said that. We want to build capacity so that you've got as many choices going forward as you can have.
And a key goal would be a term I use called social mobility. So always including the social skills as well, because they're just as important as the technical skills on any level.
Okay, cool. This you probably touched on something that's really important, which is the differences that you would see in an early childhood plan versus a teenager. So I presume that the teenager will be focused more on transition to employment and things like that. Could you give some examples of how you set a goal of employment, but what would then follow from that? Who wants to field that one?
So career education is a big topic of interest for me. So definitely we're looking at what are the skills that will help you to be employable in the future, and that's everything from social skills, being able to go meet an employer and speak confidently generally, but also speak confidently about your vision impairment and how that might impact your work, but really how you work maybe differently to reach the same outcome as anybody else in that role. So there's the social skills aspect of it, as well as just that being able to socialise with your organisational peers in the workplace. There's also those discrete skills of being able to look after yourself and manage your time, and those work skills. So some of that will be developed through going through school, but there might be other things you could be doing at home to support the development of those skills out in the workplace. So I guess, yes, we are looking to the future there, but those are skills we want to be developing really early on. We also want to build people's, and I mean people here, teachers, vision support teachers, parents, children, building just that vision for the future about being employable in an area that I'm interested in, not just landing in a job. So any activity that helps you to build on your interests, build on your skills, learn more about the world and the things that you might be interested in, any of those activities could be in a plan at any age. Does that make sense?
Yep,
I'm not
perfect.
just rambling.
And I might throw to Harzita and Kelly and just say what kind of things will we focus on in the early childhood stuff?
Yeah, so I was just going to suggest that the access technology, assistive technology, is the key. I mean, we've really started at RIDBC to try and push that access technology in the preschool years, when kids are being exposed to iPhones and computers. You're seeing sighted kids on the computers and on iPhones quite regularly. So kids with vision impairment should have the same exposure and we should have the same expectations. So we really want to be starting at an early age to expose those kids so that they can start to develop the skills to access information for when they're looking for jobs, even if it's casual work, or being able to access information. There's a lot of online things that happen once you get out, finishing school, online banking. Even when you get to uni, a lot of the learning is online. There's a lot of learning management systems that are used, so being able to navigate all that online stuff, I think, is really important.
Kelly?
And also from my mobility background, I definitely want to see equal purposeful movement on par with all peers and looking to be a step ahead, actually.
Great. I might, because we're running short on time, I might throw to the audience for one or two quick questions. Does anyone have any questions they want to throw? I've got Mike at the back, of course.
I'm just kind of interested with NDIS moving the focus so much to what does the individual want or need. What does that mean for funding for more general community building type services, whether that's camps, whether that's playgroups or local get-togethers and things like that?
Well, we're still running group programs and they're funded through different modes. There's different aspects funded by different avenues to keep those running. And I guess it's learning and making sure that you are engaged with the different services to know what they're offering at any one time.
I would say organisationally it has been a challenge, Michael, to figure out what kinds of groups we can provide and where the funding comes from. There's two specific items that we do use. One is the group therapy line, so that's within the same line as you would get other services. That's the one we prefer to use because it does kind of acknowledge that when we run a group, we are trying to build skills across, I don't know if most of you will be aware of the expanded core curriculum. We are trying to build very specific skills when we run our groups. So that's the one we prefer to use and we try to get put in plans. The other one that the NDIS often would prefer us to use is the social and community participation line item, which is partly it's a reduced rate, so I'm sure they'd love us to use that more often, but it is more of a sport and rec type of amount. There are lots of different kinds of groups being run by lots of disability services that would be eligible for one or both of those kinds of funding, so it's worthwhile looking at those options to see if there's something that's right for you. But sometimes we want our kids to be doing the mainstream groups as well. So I'd say talk to your planner about it, to your local area coordinator when you meet with them, but unfortunately they won't always put the same amount of funding into mainstream options. But definitely having the discussion to see if there's any way that they could support that, whether it's towards travel or transport to help you to get your child to those groups, or whether it's a support worker to help them when they're there, depending on what level of support your child needs. Just a couple of thoughts.
Or it could be to definitely, as Rebecca has said, the pressure has definitely been put on organisations around groups because the NDIS, regardless the line item that we use, it definitely doesn't cover the costs of running groups, the preparation involved and the staffing costs. So organisations are really having to look at fundraising to try and continue to provide that. And I guess just to note that the NDIS rate that, you know, organisations charge, that doesn't mean that that pays for, you know, that might just pay for the hour session on the day, but it doesn't cover all the other overhead costs that organisations have to be able to deliver that high quality service that they want to maintain. Now, I was going to say something and I've forgotten. Oh, yeah. So what organisations might be looking to do now is actually partnering up with community mainstream organisations. So if you have a real desire to have your child involved in some sort of mainstream community activity, it would be worthwhile talking to your vision agency that you're involved with to see if there is some way that they could provide some consultancy support to the mainstream provider, and that could be how you could use some of your NDIS funding. So the vision agency could be building the capacity of the community organisation. Yeah.
Excuse me, Matt, can I just talk to that for a sec? Of course you can. I've found that if I wanted my child to go to like a blind sports camp or something like that, I can actually self-manage that, and they will give me money directly. You're talking from a service provider perspective, but as a parent, you can ask for money for that particular camp and self-manage.
That's a really good point. Look, should we do a show of hands of who self-manages versus provider managed? So self-managed?
We do both.
Yeah, you do both. Who does provider managed? No? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, look,
Everyone seems to realise you can choose to self-manage one
Portion.
category
Yeah.
and NDIS manage another category. And actually quite convenient for my gadgets.
So we're mumbling up here also plan managers. So that's the third option. Do you want to say more about
yes,
that?
of course.
Yeah, so I spoke to our social workers, and their big tip is ask for a plan management, because the support and the admin stress that gets taken off you, they've seen that that's been really useful for some families. But do your research. Definitely do your research around that.
Good.
There's also, you're talking about registered plan managers? Yeah. So there's also support coordinators if you feel that you need help to try and find the services or the supports. That's the role of support coordinator, and NDIA will put that into your package if you require funding for that.
And that's a useful tip if you're just starting out on this journey, because navigating the raft of service providers can be pretty daunting.
Yeah, the role of the support coordinator is to build your capacity to be linked to the community. So that's the ultimate reason of why they're funded.
Cool. We could probably talk for hours on this, but we are up against a time limit. So I just want to thank our panellists for donating their time today. Thank you very much, guys.